Essay on the Generative Principle of Political Constitutions by Joseph de Maistre, 1847. Preface. Political science, which is perhaps the most thorny of all sciences, by reason of the difficulty perpetually arising of discerning what is stable or changeable in its elements, presents a very strange phenomenon, well calculated to make every wise man called to the administration of states to tremble. It is this, that whatever good sense perceives, at first view, in this science as an evident truth is almost always found, when experience has spoken, not only false but pernicious. To begin at the foundation. If we had never heard governments spoken of, and men were called upon to deliberate, for example, on hereditary or elective monarchy, we should justly regard one who should decide for the former as a madman. The arguments against it appear so naturally to reason that it is useless to repeat them. History, however, which is experimental politics, demonstrates that an hereditary monarchy is the government which is the most stable, the happiest, and most natural to man, and an elective monarchy, on the contrary, is the worst form of government known. With respect to population, commerce, prohibitive laws, and 1,000 other important subjects, the most plausible theory is almost always found to be contradicted and annulled by experience. Let us cite a few examples. What method must be adopted to render a state powerful? Quote, "It is necessary, first of all, to favor population by every possible means." End quote. On the contrary, every law tending directly to favor population, without regard to other considerations, is bad. It is even necessary to endeavor to establish in the state a certain moral power, tending to diminish the number of marriages and to render them less hasty. The proportion of births over deaths, as ascertained by tables, only proves, ordinarily, the number of the wretched, etc., etc. French economists had sketched the demonstration of these truths. The excellent work of Malthus has completed it. How shall scarcity and famine be prevented? Quote, "Nothing is more simple. It is necessary to prohibit the exportation of grains." End quote. On the contrary, a premium must be allowed to those who export them. The example and authority of England have constrained us to swallow this paradox. How shall exchange be maintained in favor of a particular country? Quote, "It is unquestionably necessary to prevent the specie from going out of it, and consequently to see to it, by severe prohibitory laws, that the state buys no more than it sells." End quote. On the contrary, these means have never been employed without lowering the exchange, or, what amounts to the same thing, without augmenting the indebtedness of the nation, and never can the opposite course be taken without raising it, that is to say, without making it evident that the credit of the nation over its neighbors is increased, etc., etc. But the observation we are now considering recurs most frequently in that which is most substantial and fundamental in politics. I mean in the very constitution of empires. It is said that the German philosophers have invented the word metapolitics to be to politics what metaphysics is to physics. This new term appears to be very happily invented to express the metaphysics of politics, for there is such a thing, and this science deserves the profound attention of observers. An anonymous writer who has been much occupied with speculations of this nature, and who has endeavored to fathom the hidden foundations of the social edifice, believed himself to be in the right when, nearly 20 years ago, he advanced as so many incontestable axioms the following propositions, diametrically opposed to the theories of that time. Number 1. No constitution results from deliberation. The rights of the people are never written, or never accept as simple declarations of pre-existing rights not written, of which nothing more can be said than that they exist because they exist. Number 2. Human action in such cases is so far circumscribed that the men who act are only circumstances, God not having judged it proper to employ in this manner supernatural means, at least circumscribes human action to such a degree that circumstances do all. It is even very common that in pursuing a certain end they obtain another, as appears in the English Constitution. Number 3. The rights of the people, properly so called, proceed almost always from the concessions of sovereigns, and then it is possible to trace them historically. But the rights of the sovereign and of the aristocracy, at least the essential, constitutive, and radical rights, if it is permissible to express oneself thus, have neither date nor known authors. Number 4. These concessions themselves have always been preceded by a state of things which rendered them necessary, and which did not depend on the sovereign. Number 5. Although written laws are only the declarations of pre-existing rights, yet it does not follow that all these rights can be written. There is always in every constitution something which cannot be written and which must be left in a dark and venerable cloud under pain of overturning the state. Number 6. The more is written, the weaker the constitution. The reason is obvious. Laws are only declarations of rights, and rights are only declared when they are attacked, so that the multiplicity of written constitutional laws only evinces the number of shocks and the danger of destruction. The most vigorous and flourishing institution of profane antiquity was that of Lacedaemon, where nothing was written. Number 7. No nation can give liberty to itself if it has it not. When a nation begins to reflect upon itself, its laws are already made. Human influence does not extend beyond the development of existing rights, but which were acknowledged or disputed. If the imprudent overleap these limits by rash reforms, the nation loses what it had without attaining what it wishes. Hence results the necessity of innovating only very rarely and always with moderation and trembling. Number 8. Lawgivers, strictly speaking, are extraordinary men belonging perhaps only to the ancient world and to the youth of nations. When Providence has decreed the more rapid formation of a political constitution, there appears a man clothed with an indefinable power. He speaks, and he makes himself to be obeyed. These lawgivers par excellence possess one distinctive characteristic. They are kings, or eminently noble. In this point there is and can be no exception. It was on this account that the institution of Solon, the most frail of antiquity, failed. The flourishing days of Athens, which did not continue long, were all the while interrupted by conquests and tyrannies, and Solon even saw the Pisistratidae. Number 9. These lawgivers, even notwithstanding their wonderful power, have only collected the pre-existing elements which existed in the customs and character of the people, and have always acted in the name of the divinity. Number 10. Liberty, in a sense, is the gift of kings, for all nations were constituted free by kings. This is the general rule, and the exceptions that might be indicated would enter into the rule if they were discussed. Number 11. There never has existed a free nation which had not, in its natural constitution, germs of liberty as old as itself, and no nation has ever successfully attempted to develop, by its fundamental written laws, other rights than those which existed in its natural constitution. Number 12. No assembly of men can give existence to a nation. An attempt of this kind ought even to be ranked among the most memorable acts of folly, exceeding in folly what all the bedlams of the world might produce, most absurd and extravagant. It does not appear that, since the year 1796, the date of the first edition of the work we quote, there has anything passed in the world to induce the author to abandon his theory. We believe, on the contrary, that it may be useful at this moment to develop the theory fully, and to trace it to its ultimate results. the most important of which is, doubtless, the one that is found announced in these terms in the 10th chapter of the same work. Quote, "Men cannot create a sovereign. At the utmost, he may be the instrument in dethroning the sovereign and delivering his kingdom to another sovereign already royal. And even the manner in which human power is employed in these circumstances is well fitted to humble it. It is here especially that we may address to man these words of J. Rousseau. Moreover, there never has existed a royal family to whom a plebeian origin could be assigned. If such a phenomenon should appear, it would create an era in this world. With respect to this proposition, we may reflect that the divine judgment has just now sanctioned it in a manner sufficiently solemn. But who knows whether the ignorant levity of our age will not seriously say, if he had willed it, he would still be in his place. Just as is now repeated after 2 centuries, if Richard Cromwell had possessed the genius of his father, he would have fixed the protectorate in his family, which is precisely the same as to say, if this family had not ceased to reign, it would reign still. It is written, 'By me kings reign.' This is not a phrase of the church, a metaphor of the preacher. It is a literal truth, simple and palpable. It is a law of the political world. God makes kings in the literal sense. He prepares royal races, maturing them under a cloud which conceals their origin. They appear at length crowned with glory and honor. They take their places, and this is the most certain sign of their legitimacy. The truth is that they arise, as it were, of themselves, without violence on the one part and without marked deliberation on the other. It is a species of magnificent tranquility, not easy to express. Legitimate usurpation would seem to me to be the most appropriate expression, if not too bold, to characterize these kinds of origins, which time hastens to consecrate. Let no one, then, permit himself to be dazzled by the most splendid human appearances. Who has ever concentrated in himself more of them than the extraordinary personages whose fall still resounds throughout Europe? Has there ever been a sovereignty outwardly so well fortified, a greater consolidation of means, a man more powerful, more active, more formidable? For a long time we saw him trample underfoot 20 nations, silent and frozen with dread, and his power at length had struck certain roots which might have led even hope to despair. Yet he is fallen, and so low that pity, while contemplating him, draws back for fear of being touched by him. We may observe, moreover, in passing, that for a reason somewhat different it has become equally difficult to speak of this man and of his august rival, who has rid the world of him. The one escapes insult and the other praise. But to return. In a work known only to a few persons in St. Petersburg, the author wrote in the year 1810, "If, when 2 parties encounter each other in a revolution, on one side precious victims are seen to fall, we may rest assured that this party will triumph at last, notwithstanding all appearances to the contrary." The truth of this assertion has also just been verified in a manner the most striking and the least expected. The moral order has its laws as well as the physical, and the investigation of these laws is altogether worthy of occupying the meditations of a true philosopher. After an entire age of criminal trifling, it is high time to recall to mind what we are, and to trace all knowledge back to its source. It is this that has induced the author of this little work to permit it to escape from the timid portfolio which has restrained it for 5 years. He permits the date of it to stand and gives it to the world, word for word, just as it was written at that time. Friendship has called forth this publication, which perhaps is so much the worse for the author, for this good dame is, on certain occasions, as blind as her brother. Be this as it may, the mind which has dictated the work enjoys a privilege well understood. He may doubtless be mistaken sometimes on indifferent points, he may exaggerate or speak too confidently. He may, in fine, offend against language or taste, and in this case, so much the better for the evil disposed, if perchance there be any such. But there will always be left to him the well-founded hope of not displeasing anyone, since he loves all the world, and, moreover, he will enjoy the perfect assurance of interesting a numerous and very estimable class of men, without the possibility of injuring a single person, a confidence altogether tranquilizing.